Welcome to the 9th video in the Mandola build. This will be the final build video. I will soon have the summary video coming out. In the last video we pretty much completed the finishing. In this video we're going to make a bridge, we're going to make a nut, we're going to make a truss rod cover, and then we're going to assemble the Mandola and play it and see how we did. So get ready for the final build, and hopefully in a day or two we'll have the final playing video out and ready to go. We're ready to make the bridge. So I've got this piece of Macassar ebony that I've formed into a blank. I have made sure that this bottom edge is perfectly square. Alright, so now that I've got it down to my 1-inch blank, I need to mark the center of it so I can lay out the top. I bought archtop guitar thumb wheels. So my plan is to drill the holes for these and then use epoxy to hold the bottom of the threaded part in place. Alright, so I've drilled the holes. They don't go all the way through, but almost. So now it's time to lay this out. So the first piece, I'm going to cut the bottom off. I'm going to leave 3/8 of an inch at the bottom, and then I'm going to shape that into something pleasing. We'll see what we come up with. Alright, starting to look a bit like a bridge. So I did put lines so I know where my pieces go together again. Now I'm going to notch out the edges where it's going to recess into the top, and then I'll cut the matching notch on the base. And then we'll round over these edges and we will lay out the top of the bridge where the strings will rest. But right now this is still close to 1 inch. Once I do the recess, it will be right at 7/8 of an inch. So we're looking pretty good. I've rough cut the notch, and now I'm just testing to see how it matches up with the bridge. The idea of this notch is it gives this thumb wheel a place to fit in. So that we can actually bring it all the way down. The next step I have in making the bridge is going to be to enlarge the holes in the top piece. The reason for that is they need to slip over, and at this size they can't slip over. So I'm just going to take a twist bit so I can center it on the existing hole and just ream this out. Now I'm just rounding over these edges. We used a 16-inch radius on the fingerboard. So if I set this at a 16-inch radius now, I'll be ready to set the string spacing. So I'm going to take my 16-inch sanding block, and I'm going to set that radius. Alright, we have a 16-inch radius on the top of the bridge. So what I've done now is I've taken my 2 inches, which is the width at the fingerboard edges. I came in 1/8 from each side, 1 3/4, divide the space by 4, which is 7/16, and I've marked those out. This is going to be where I'm going to set the strings. So what I'm going to do for now is I'm just going to start taking off some material. But what we need to do with these is we need to do some intonation. So we got to wait to do too much, but I'm just going to break this edge. So what I've got to do now on the bridge is I've got to set up the intonation. You can see that this bridge on an existing mandolin has notches, and I'm going to try to set that basic pattern. I can tweak it once I do the setup. So what I've got is I've got the bridge top here. I've marked off the separations, and then I've marked approximately where the intonations need to go. So I've got the top of the bridge. I've already filed out one section. Now it's time to do the next. I'm starting with a small rasp. I did use a razor saw to cut the dividers. And now I'll use the rasp to get off most of the material down to the line I marked. Okay, we've got the intonation notches set on the bridge top. Now we'll just sand it down and it'll be ready to install when the finish is cured a little better. Alright, so we're fitting the nut. So I've set the nut into its spot. I've marked where the edges of the fingerboard are. And then I take this pencil that I've flattened out and I'm going to run it right across the frets. And what this should do is give me an idea of where the height is. I've radiused the nut to 16 inches and now I'm cutting in the corners because the headstock flares out where the nut is, so the nut is not going to be totally square. It's going to actually have a bit of an angle to it where the headstock cuts out. Alright, it fits nicely, so now we're just rounding over the back, knocking off any sharp edges. Not too bad. So what I'll do now is I'll sand it, fine sand it, polish it up. Got it sanded down, sanded to 600 grit. At this point now I'm going to the micro mesh and we'll just polish this guy up and make it nice and smooth. There we go, 12,000 grit. We got a nice nut, just ready to lay out the string spacing. Okay, so a mandolin has 4 courses of 2 strings. So it's like a 4-string instrument, but they're paired up. And unlike a 12-string guitar, they're not in octaves. They're actually tuned in unison. So I've laid out the nut. And the way I did that was I marked the 2 ends where I wanted the strings to end. And I used a string ruler. And I lined up the farthermost, well, I also calculated the spacing between the strings, which is about 3/32 on center. So what I did is I marked the ends, I marked the second of the pair for the first strings at 3/32, and I used the string gauging ruler to find the spacing for those guys, and I marked those off. Then I shifted the spacing ruler to the end and did the same thing. So what that did is that gave me 4 pairs of strings all spaced equally. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the slots. So to make the initial cut for the slots, I'm going to use a saw. This saw has a 0.01 curve, but this is going to give my files a place to start. So I've got the gauges of the Mandola strings are 14, 23, 34, and 49. So what I'll be doing is I'll be cutting the slots with the closest file I have to those sizes, which in this case is a 16, a 24, a 35, and a 56. So I'm just going to take the slot, the file, set it into the groove, and I want to angle downward. I want the high end to be right at the front of the nut. That's where it needs to be. Right now I'm just going deep enough to capture the string. There we go, we got our basic slots in place. Now we'll just start assembling the mandola. Alright, I've got the marks on the bridge now. The spacing ruler was not able to handle it, so I actually had to do it manually. I basically took the space inside the outer pairs, divided it by 3. The strings are separated by 1/8 of an inch at this end. So now I'll take my my saw, make an initial cut, and cut a small bit away like I did on the nut to hold the strings. Alright, we're finally ready to begin attaching the tailpiece. So I need to drill the hole out for the electronics, which I fished out of the sound hole. So I'm going to set the tailpiece in place on the center line. And then I'm going to back it off just a little bit, take my brad point bit that is the same size as the hole in the tailpiece, and mark where I have to drill. So now I've got a mark, but I need to make the hole bigger than that because the barrel needs to come through, and that's thicker than this end, which is what I sized this hole for. I sized the hole so that the jack end can come through. So the solution was to make the hole a 1/2 inch. That'll give me a little bit of play so I'm not jamming the piece through. I've already set the depth before I put the mandola together. So now I'll just line my point of my drill bit up with my marked center hole, and we'll drill into the mandola. So I'm going to take the fastening nut off. I'm going to run a 1/4 inch plug on a cable down into the mandola. What I'm going to do is I'm going to plug it in. We're going to hope we have enough tension on there to bring it right out, which we do. And we got it. Strap button will go on over it. And then we'll drill out the holes for the screws to hold on the tailpiece. Alright, so I pre-drilled the holes. I'm just going to put a little bit of beeswax on the end of the screws and install those. So now it's time to install the tuners, and the first thing I need to do is install the bushings. So we've drilled out all the holes. Now I'm just installing the screws. The last bit of construction I have is to make a truss rod cover. And I'm going to make it out of bloodwood. I got a nice thin piece. The binding gave me trouble, but in general I do like working with bloodwood. So I've got myself a bloodwood blank, and I'm going to try to just keep this very simple. Kind of stick to the shape of the peg head, mimicking some of the body lines. So there we go. I'll mark where the holes are going to be for the screws. There's going to be 3 screws. One there. One there. And one there. I'll drill those holes and then I will sand and finish this. Alright, as we have now completed the instrument, I'm working on stringing it up and getting everything set, and the next video will be the final competition video where I will play the mandola and you'll get to see what it sounds like all put together. And I can tell you it came out pretty good. The intonation was spot on, the action was spot on. I did have to shave a little bit off the bottom of the nut, and then I shaved too much off the bottom of the nut and had to shim it, but it's fine. The action's real good. It plays very nicely, but you'll see that in the final video. As always, thanks for watching.